Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Jewel Hohman. How are you today, Jewel?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And I am so excited to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I think it's just going to be so fantastic. So just to share a little bit about you, Jewel, you are a coach, a self-described connection enthusiast, which I think is cool. I love connecting people and things, but you have a degree in sociology and psychology and really a pending master's degree. And so that's exciting. Congrats on that. But we're going to be talking about friendships, and we're really going to dive deep into this. And so, Joel, would you start out by sharing how did this all happen for you? Like, what led down this path? And take it away.
Yeah. I think my whole entire life I was always a little bit lonely, and that comes from me personally. I didn't have very great relationships with my family. My home life was rather turbulent, and that could create what's called emotional loneliness in a kiddo. And so I think I kind of walked through the world already craving connection and looking for it and really prioritizing where I could get it. Then when I got to high school, when I got to college, I realized even when I had good friends that I still didn't feel that close to them. I was also, I would say extroverted, but I was a socially anxious extrovert. And that is such a painful experience because it's just let me want to be around people and want to connect and get my cup filled up by connecting with other people. And let me overthink everything I say and do and worry all the time if people hate me, if they're happy with me, people pleasing. And I kept hearing from other people, it will get better as you get older. It'll get better as you get older. And I was getting older, and it wasn't getting much better. And I do think there's some truth to that statement in general. I think as we get older, we have more experiences and we learn, and our thoughts change for that reason. But I was really, really struggling. And so in college, just started this interest of how can I create meaningful connection? How can I not spend the rest of my life feeling anxious and lonely the majority of the time? So I am a huge nerd. I had the privilege of working in a psych lab at the time. And so I knew how to read research. I still to this day get Google alerts for articles and things like that. And I was I'm going to figure this out. So I started learning about friendship and learned that there was an actual science to this. I started learning a lot about high functioning social anxiety, which is what I had, and what really helped with that. And it turns out we know so much about those things. If we're just not talking about it in our pop culture as much. But truthfully, we know so much about what helps those things. And so I started to change and shift, and people started complimenting me on it. I mean, I would never do a ton of speaking, if you will, and people probably can't hear it right now, but I used to be, kind of quiet and not be able to, do things like this. And now I've done over, I think, 100 podcast interviews. It's so different. So I had people start coming up to me and complimenting me and saying things to me what did you do? People I've known forever. What did you do? You seem so different. And then when I really started making the meaningful friendships, then I had even more people reach out to me. And I had more people say things like, can I join your girls' trips? Where did you meet these girls? How did you make these friends? And I had known, Desiree, I knew that there was a loneliness epidemic. You can't look into this research without learning about that. I knew that most people, even before the pandemic, felt lonely pretty regularly. And that loneliness had been linearly increasing since the 1970s. And it wasn't until those people started asking me those questions that I was oh, it's really not just me. And so I, just for fun, started coaching people on confidence and social settings and friendship. And it took off in its first year, which is super awesome. I've been doing it for almost 5 years now, which is wild. But I mean, I was right. I was not definitely not the only one.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Joel, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I absolutely agree with you that you're not the only one. I feel like I'm the only one, but now we know it's not. We're not the only ones who experience this kind of isolation, social isolation, feeling like we don't have deeper connections. Why don't we have these deep friendships? And this is some of the things I wanted to talk to you about. And what you said in there about overthinking things that you said, like when you're at a party or at an event or whatever. And so, why don't we start there? Why don't we start with what's happening with that? Why are we leaving places and events going like, oh my, why did I say that? That was just the stupidest thing. And those kind of things that we can say to ourselves.
There's a bunch of different reasons, just like anything else, right? Everything's nuanced. But I do think that this trend is increasing. We know that social anxiety is almost becoming the norm for younger generations, and it's increased like massively, especially since the pandemic. So, again, you are not alone if you were struggling with that, with overthinking. And we do it for a few reasons. We really want to connect with people. We want to be liked. We want to quote unquote care, or we care, quote unquote, what people think. And although as much as we want to deny that and we want to be like, no, I shouldn't care and I should just be myself, it's natural, y'all, for all of us to want to belong. It's such a fundamental need, actually. One thing I learned, if you will, I call it like therapy school, but in my master's program, one thing that I learned was that when it comes to like our needs, belonging actually comes before esteem and confidence. And I think most people would think it's the opposite. Belonging is so necessary for us. So anyway, when we are in situations and we start to question ourselves and overthink, a lot of times what that actually comes from is shame. And it's, I don't want other people to see these things that I am shameful of. Now, if you're like me, where you're very insecure, you really struggled feeling like you belonged, I was trying to be perfect and make sure everybody, like watching their micro expressions, like even like if their eyes were interested in me, trying to figure out, oh, do they like me? Do I belong? And then overthinking what I say and do. It comes from us trying to be perfect because we're trying to avoid shame and we're trying to belong. And for some people, when they hear that, they can feel kind of defeated. And what I want to offer is that if we release some of the shame and we create more belonging, we release the expectation to be perfect, it really like quiets down. Like truthfully, my truth to this day is that it used to be after every single social interaction that I ever had and like any event that I had, and now I can like speak on stages, I can do like over 100 podcast interviews, and truly it feels like just like a drop in the ocean compared to it being all consuming. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I can really appreciate what you're saying in that you're trying to be perfect because you don't want to not be accepted, right? And how fundamental has that been in our existence, right? And how fundamental it is to be accepted, to be part of the group. And so I can really see how we could feel like we don't want to be pushed out of the group because of it being an absolute necessity through the entirety of our existence. So, I can really appreciate that. And it's interesting that you're saying how there's also shame involved in this as well. And so, not to get too far off topic, but how does this play into what's happening?
I also want to make sure I'm clear because I did say like belonging is such a fundamental need. When we think about like the hierarchy of needs, like belonging is so important. And just like everything's nuanced in life, what I'm about to say kind of contradicts that a little bit. But I think if we're in a situation where we're going to be rejected and we run home to our people where we belong, that's really, really good for our mental health. So anyway, I do want to say that like overall belonging normally is first. These are all needs that we have. But to answer your question, so shame and how that's a part of it is, and there's common forms of this, especially in like high functioning social anxiety, is we shame ourselves for feeling the anxiety in the first place. We shame ourselves because we think that we are incompetent in some type of way. So I had my own brand of this. I think everybody does, of like not enoughness, the thing that they feel shame about. And for me, I really thought like something was off about me. And like that's why I didn't fit in with my family. And like I was just so nervous. I couldn't ever exactly pinpoint what it was. But for other people, they might be like, oh, I'm not intelligent enough. It might be more specific. It might be multiple things. For me, it was this general, oh, I think something's like off about me. And that's why I don't fit in here. That's why I'm dealing with this turbulent environment. And so that shame, what it would look like is I would go to social situations and I would be so afraid that other people were going to see that something was off about me, that they were going to see the thing that I was shameful about. And when I mentioned earlier that we know so much actually about social anxiety, is that when we treat ourselves with acceptance and compassion, like that is one thing that has been proven over and over and over again to really help social anxiety. Because if you don't have that thing that you, or things that you are feeling shame about, you aren't like, you, of course, you still want somebody to enjoy the interaction with you. That's normal. But there's not this overwhelming, oh my gosh, I need to make them like me, or else I'm going to beat myself up. I'm going to feel way worse. I'm going to overthink everything I say and do and cry when I go to sleep. Right? So that's how it really plays a role. A lot of people think social anxiety is about fear. It's really driven by shame.
Okay, thank you so much for like kind of clarifying that and going into a little bit more detail. So, you mentioned earlier about the pandemic and a loneliness epidemic and really began before the pandemic, but I think has kind of like escalated since then. Do you want to share any thoughts on like what's happening now and how we can begin to kind of reconnect since we're all about in the world now?
Yeah, this is such a hot topic for me, Desiree. So I just got to be really honest with you. You opened a whole can of worms right now. So, um, because the one thing I will say, the number one thing that people can do to kind of break out of this culture of isolation that has been created before the pandemic and amplified by the pandemic is to honestly get off of their phones. And I have an app called Opal I really like. I'm sure there's a bunch out there, but it blocks my social media apps because these things are designed to be addicting. They're designed to suck up your time. And so if you're not having open space in your day, that's open space where you would think of a friend and send them a message, call a friend, want to go on a walk with a friend, things like that. So social media is not that social anymore. I think that is one of the number one things that we can all do. It doesn't matter how old you are, honestly, for that. But there's been this trend since the 1970s because as we, and there's, oh my gosh, there's so many things I could say about this, but as we have become more and more individualistic, like before people used to live in like multi-generational houses, right? Where there was like a community, a family. And since we are all like the picture of success is going out, living out on your own, now it's become living in your own, in your isolated home, like just sometimes just you or your partner or like your child. And so this trend, there's so many things that go involved with that. We've seen like the lack of front porches play a part. There's been the rising cost that everybody is feeling right now, and inflation makes a lot of social activities expensive. And so a lot of people think that they need to go out and like do something with their friends and then are like, wow, I don't have the funds for that. So there's that. But again, social media, the decline in us spending time with our friends was massive when social media really became part of our lives. Our hours with our friends that we used to spend every single week were about 6 hours. And then since the social media boom, it's now about 2 hours a week. Yeah. So, and then, even before when the TV was invented, people stayed at home in the living room. So, there's a ton of different reasons for why this has happened and how we've separated from community. But I think one thing that I just want to showcase to everybody else is that because we're socially anxious, because we feel, shame, and shame is everywhere in our culture, right? Even in the ads, like, fix this part of you, fix this part of you. I think we now assume that connection is work and it's not something that is energizing. It's not something that we think to do when we think of like relaxing. And look, y'all, like I am not saying be around people all of the time. Like screw your alone time. Let's forget it. Come and, hang out with people all the time. That is not what I'm saying at all. And of course, this is a case by case basis. But there's a general trend that we have of social avoidance, in my opinion, where we are not talking to each other as much when we're just out in the world. We're avoiding each other with, getting DoorDash, groceries delivered, etc., and not going out into the spaces. We can get anything right delivered to our home. And then because a lot of us are stressed and a lot of people are really struggling economically, we just want to numb out on our phones, not make the time to go on a walk, to do things that are free, y'all. So we've even seen a huge trend in like just casual hanging out that has massively dropped between people. Now, I will say, now I'm somebody that doesn't have kids, but for people in their 30s to 40s, even like 20s, another trend that has happened along with all of these factors, right? This is such a nuanced reason for why we are more socially isolated. But another trend that has happened is that people are really prioritizing their kids' experience, which love that. I'm not a parent. I am not going to speak to that. I'm just going to speak to what the data says. And that is that we are spending so much less time with our friends and more time with our kids, which I will say I've worked with a lot of mama bears. I'm really passionate about the mamas having support and community. That village is so necessary. And I will say, like, there is this, oh, my kids need to be my whole entire world. And then you aren't getting supported. You're not getting your cup filled up, right? And so, yeah, maybe you plan a bunch of activities during the weekend with your kids, and maybe that does fill you up a bit. But it's important for you to be seen. It's important for you to be heard, for you to feel supported. And friendship and meaningful connection really does that for us. And what used to happen is that people kind of treated their kids where they were like, okay, you're just coming along life with me, right? Where it was like, I'm going to my friend's house. I'm going to do this. I'm bringing the kids and like, they're going to go play in the living room or they're going to go play outside. Right. And I think that's something that we can all bring back a little bit. So again, you opened a little can of worms, but I also think it's important for everybody to hear because one, there's some intentional decisions that we can make that will actually help us fill our cups up. But two, this is not your fault. There's another shame that's added when we feel lonely or when we feel like we're lacking friends. And look, like the majority of the people in the States, honestly, in a lot of parts in the world, are really feeling this right now. And it's because of like tons and tons of these factors at play.
Gosh, Jewel, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I was nodding along and agreeing with so much of what you were saying because you're absolutely right. I think when you're speaking to the social media and the apps, we're just so sucked into that and it just eats up our time where we look up and we're like 3 hours are gone and what just happened. So I can absolutely relate to that and understand that from a personal experience. But I mean, just so much of what you said in there is so true. It's like, yes, we are prioritizing our children and there's nothing wrong with that. They are important and their experience and their growing up experience is absolutely important, but it tips the scales to the other direction, like you just said, because then now we're not getting what we need as mothers or fathers of children. And so it's like, where is that middle point and how do we kind of get back there? But again, like you said, we can have food delivered, we can have groceries delivered. So there's just absolutely no interaction with people anymore. And so I mean, I absolutely agree with all of that, what you're sharing. It's so true.
If I can so one more thing, just really quick. This also, y'all, and again, this is nobody's fault, but this also creates a cycle when we tend to avoid and avoid and avoid people, avoid interacting with people because we're stressed, because we think that the only way to fill up our cup is like alone time, TV time, it can make us more anxious and it continues this cycle, right? Where we really have this like social avoidance pattern. And so I just wanted to say that to everybody because I'm really worried about the future of our like social fitness, and we know that belonging is so, so important for our mental health, for our well being. The longest study on happiness said that your relationships and the quality of your relationships is the thing that matters most for us in our quality of life, right? I just wanted to say that because thinking about it as like social fitness, I think is really helpful to some people as well. Recognizing that there's a social avoidance pattern, a cycle there is really helpful to a lot of people as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And it's so interesting, I think, because it does become, well, it just takes so much work to get together with my friends or whatever. I'm just tired. I've been working all day. These things have happened. I have kids and whatever. And so it's just so much easier to just sit on your couch. And because it feels like less work, but it's so important to remember that it doesn't have to be work. We don't have to spend money. Like you shared, we can go for walks. We can just be together. And that's important to remember and how vital that is for us in our well being over the long term as well.
Mhm.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, good stuff. Okay, so let me ask you for people who really do want to be connecting more and deeper in these friendships, how can you do that if you're like afraid or scared or think that people are going to think you're crazy or there's something wrong with you or whatever? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. Or if you're in the social avoidance cycle, there's so many things. I will say it can be really helpful for everybody to understand that there is a science to friendship. Every friendship ever has three things. And I think we could talk about some strategies around those three things that I think really benefit everybody. But those three things, if everybody can imagine a triangle, like imagine that at the bottom of the triangle, this triangle's layered, and at the bottom layer, we have like acquaintances. And then we move up to the middle of the triangle and say we have friends. And then as we move up, we have good friends. And then when we get to the top, we have like what a lot of people call like best friends. A lot of times for us, our partners are up there. These are like our confidants, the people that we call when stuff hits the fan, right? The people that we call shamelessly, you know? So how every friendship ever, how friendship is built is if you imagine that triangle, the bottom and the foundation of all of these friendships are meaningful moments, positive interactions that we have with each other. And I say meaningful moments because this doesn't just mean like sharing a laugh and having a good memory with somebody. It also means feeling supported, feeling seen. Like it could be like literally crying your eyes out and feeling witnessed by somebody. So these meaningful moments, and what happens for a lot of people is they start building up the other two parts of friendship. And then that foundation of meaningful moments starts to go away where they start to have like more moments of contempt and it becomes a bit unbalanced because every friendship ever is not just meaningful moments, right? It's not just positivity. There's conflict, things like that. But when it starts to become more conflict, more tension, etc., that's where a lot of people end up in these like best friendships. And then they're like, what the heck? This doesn't feel fulfilling. So anyway, there's that. And then how we move somebody from that acquaintance level to the confidant level is through having those meaningful moments, that foundation. And then we move them up through two things, vulnerability and consistency. Vulnerability, sometimes when I say that, some people get really excited and they're like, yes, love vulnerability, love talking about all the things. Let's get deep, let's get emotional. A lot of podcasters, right, are like, I don't want to hear your story. So, vulnerability is being vulnerable in those moments, yes, but it's incremental vulnerability, like over time. What I really did when I learned how important vulnerability was and didn't learn about the rest of this triangle, which shout out to friendship researcher and author Shasta Nelson, who created like this and really studied it. But before I learned about the rest of the triangle, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make a best friend. And I would go to coffee with women and just trauma dump, basically. And like be like, here's all the things about me. So you know everything about me. Let me ask all about you so I know all the things about you, and then we're gonna be best friends. And I was always shocked. I mean, that didn't automatically create a best friendship. So it's not the only thing. And if vulnerability scares you, if you're listening to this and you're like, ooh, I'm not one of those people, that's okay. One way to think about vulnerability is like getting to know or see more of them and them seeing more of you each time. So that could be if you have a coworker and you invite them over to your house, that's vulnerable because they've only ever seen you at work, right? So they're seeing your home. They're seeing if you put your shoes nicely to the side or if you kick them off. They're seeing all these other things about you. So vulnerability in that way, I think, can really help people that also struggle with that with, okay, it's just seeing a little bit more of them and then seeing more of me over time. And then consistency, people also tend to have a lot of thoughts about this as well because they're like, oh my gosh, another thing I have to be consistent about? Gross. But consistency can really kind of be broken down into two parts, history and frequency. Really, consistency is about the time we invest together. So frequency, this is why so many of us get so close to our coworkers, and also why after the pandemic, working from home really hurt a lot of people's loneliness and social connection. Because if we see somebody every day, we're working by them, we're starting to see them right when, they're a little angry at our boss. We're starting to see them when we're collaborating on a project and we're seeing them all the time. That is really good. Our brain needs that to feel safe, to feel trust with somebody. So frequency and then history, because this is something that happens a lot, Desiree, is people will say to me, well, I have like a low maintenance friend. Or they'll say to me, that's not true because I talk to my best friend like 3-4 times a year. She's my best friend. That's great. That's beautiful. If you are listening and you have one of those relationships, let me guess. You were probably roommates in college. You've known each other since you were in grade school, and you have a lot of history with this person, right? So we can have those relationships where we feel so close to somebody, where the emotional memory of that connection is so strong that we don't need to have as much consistency with them anymore. But it's because we have built up a lot of history together, right? I am really close to my college roommate, and I only see her in person about 4 times a year, y'all. And I feel so close to her because we were inseparable in college. We have a lot of history built up together. So as we increase history, vulnerability, we have meaningful moments. That is how every friendship ever moves from the bottom to the top. And sometimes that happens really quickly. Like if we're at summer camp and we're getting a lot of vulnerability, a lot of meaningful moments, a lot of consistency, and a lot of time together, we can move somebody up really quickly. So for somebody that wants to connect and is struggling with social anxiety or is struggling with like social avoidance, or just maybe doesn't even know where to start. So speaking to the person that wants to like make new friends, one thing that is really helpful for new friendships are book clubs because they hit all three of those things. We can see that now, right? It hits all three of those things. Book clubs are amazing for that. Clubs that meet more than once. I've seen a lot of people go to an event like one time and then they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't make any friends in my community. We got to meet regularly. And if this is like a new friendship, maybe even with somebody, in your neighborhood, I just started doing this recently with a girl that lives really close to me, is going on like that's all we can manage right now is like bi-weekly walks. Doing something maybe that you're already doing and inviting somebody. Y'all, the worst case scenario is they say no and that you offered them the best gift in the world, which was to connect, right? So this is where, and this is like a whole other topic, but where we also have to unapologetically initiate with people and offer, again, the best gift in the world, offer connection, offer for somebody to feel seen and valued. I can't think of any other experience, truthfully, and I'm probably biased, but I can't think of any experience that is more fulfilling than feeling valued and witnessed by somebody. I really can't. So you're offering somebody that gift. A lot of people are afraid of bothering somebody. And what I want to offer is like most people, as we know, like look at the stats, everybody, most people are lonely. So initiating with people and building in those routines. I did this with making new friends because I had a great group of friends that I connected with deeper, but I also wanted to make new friends that better fit my interests at the time. And so when I was doing this myself, like five, oh my gosh, like 6 years ago. Whoa, 6 years, maybe? Oh my gosh, I don't know. But a long time ago now, one thing that I did was because I was trying to be friends with everybody at one point, like be best friends with everybody. You can't do that. So I prioritized 4 women that I wanted to apply these 3 things with and move them up my triangle, if you will. And 2 of them are my confidants. They are at the top of my triangle. They are the people that I call when stuff hits the fan. They are people that feel like family to me now. And one of them moved up my triangle and became like a good friend. And then the other one rejected me, the last one, which happens. And I'll tell you what though, because I wasn't trying to be friends with everybody and I wasn't just like hanging on to one person and being like, you have to be my best friend. It's not that it didn't hurt. Rejection's supposed to hurt. It doesn't matter how confident you are, it's supposed to hurt. But I wasn't as attached or like it wasn't as detrimental, if you will, to me. The wound there wasn't as deep because I was doing this with other people at the time too. So I really, really, really recommend doing that. That was such a mouthful. I can go into how to deepen connections, which is where most people are at, but I'm curious on what you think and what came up for you.
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, Jewel, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was fantastic. And this idea of the, triangle of friendship, totally new concept for me and probably for the listeners as well. So thank you for going into the detail on that for us. It's excellent stuff. I really do appreciate it. Oh my gosh, there's so much. I would love to dig even deeper into this and talking about how do we make new friendships? Do we try to have deeper friendships with our existing friend group? There's so much more to this conversation. So I guess what I think I'd like to know is because I understand, like, we're in different places in our lives. Maybe when we were all together initially, we had kids together and we were in friend group because of our children. But now our children are grown and they're off doing their own things. And so now we're in a different place. So now we need to develop new friendships. And so you shared a little bit about that. And so that's awesome. But what if you do have this group of friends that you want to really keep that connection and try to make it deeper? What can you do for that?
This is honestly a whole workshop all on its own that I teach at like companies and like conferences and stuff. So if anybody wants to hear that, you can message me. Shameless plug, but I will try to make it really concise. So when we have like a friend group, especially that we've had for a while, and maybe it's starting to like the relationship starting to change, or maybe we have friends, right? And this was true for me as well. I had a friend group and I was like, I just don't feel as close to them. There are some things that we can do. I also want to say though that friendship isn't always forever and compatibility, even in friendship, does change. And that notion on its own can be really hard for people. Sometimes people are like, well, why try? Because it's so important to get your cup filled up. And maybe like this person was just around for like that certain period of time and you got your cup filled up by them at that time. So I do want to acknowledge that and say that friendships also change every 7 years. And what that means is sometimes somebody who is at the top of our triangle becomes like more towards the middle. Sometimes somebody goes off the triangle. Sometimes somebody else comes in. And I think friendship is really beautiful because it allows us that flexibility, but also that can be really painful, especially if you're not out meeting new people, especially if you're not in community in some type of way. That can be really, really painful when that happens. It can create a huge connection gap. But when it comes to deepening friendships or maybe even just like reestablishing the connection, making the connection deeper or like more fulfilling again is, well, one, if you have a friend that maybe you bonded over play dates and then as your kids got older together, maybe your kids were friends. And so you became friends for that. One thing to do, and or even, sorry, all these ideas. Or even if you work with a coworker that you got really close to, one thing to do is to move that friendship outside of that context on its own. So, and again, that's vulnerable. So, if you have a friend that is a coworker, and even if one of you changes jobs, you want to be really close, I really recommend that you move that to whether that's wine nights, whether that is like walking together. One of my favorite things that I've ever heard of is that these women would do yoga videos on YouTube together. They'd bring their yoga mats. Every week they would go to one of their houses, like a different house. And then whoever hosted the free yoga YouTube video that week would have like some snacks, right? So we want to move it, and you'd be surprised at how people want this, y'all. I chose, when I was prioritizing my people that I wanted to move up my triangle, I picked women that I hadn't talked to in years, that I just had like a really good spark with and that really fit the needs that I wanted to get met. And some of them had like a lot of friends, and I was just like, I'm just gonna try it, right? And I actually had those two friends on my podcast, which we talk about later, and I told them for the first time without wine how I made them my friends. And you can hear it throughout that entire conversation that it was something so enjoyable for them. It was such a gift for them, and it was something that they actively chose to. So when it comes to reestablishing, if you will, a connection, is moving it outside of the context that you currently have. So even if it's maybe now your kids are grown and now this is somebody that you just like call every once in a while, see if you can move it towards like a game night. See if you can move it towards, again, doing something that you are already interested in or already do, like working out, stuff like that. That can be really helpful. When it comes to a friend group and people are all over the country, traditions are huge, and consistency of that. I cannot recommend enough, and I know it's not feasible for everybody, the power of an annual girls trip. I cannot recommend that. That hits all of the things, right? And if you're doing that with people that you've been friends with for a really long time, that can really help fill up the cup. Now, granted, sometimes friendships change because there's differences, because there's tension. And so this next like little piece of advice, I think, goes for deepening friendships all over the board. And that is to talk to your friends about the friendship itself. That's vulnerable as heck. It's honestly the most vulnerable, the most intimate thing you can do, I think, is to talk to somebody about the relationship that you have. And we do this, at least I said this once at a podcast, and they were like, I think a lot of people do that. But I was like, oh, okay. But I see a lot of my peers do this with their partners, right? With their husbands. They're constantly talking to their husband about the relationship and how they experience a relationship and what they would like more of, and like what their partner would like more of or less of, and how they can work together, right? And doing this in friendships creates so much trust, creates so much meaningfulness. I can't even explain. And a lot of times what happens, especially for female friendships, is we tend to be overloaded by work and chores and kids, and women still take on most of the household responsibilities compared to men. And so we tend to project onto other women like, hey, you need to be fulfilling me because I'm stretching myself everywhere in life. Like, this doesn't need to be work. That is such a shorthanded way of saying that big nuanced situation or issue that comes up. But a lot of women tend to not talk to their friends about how they feel. They say things like, oh, she should just know if she was really my friend. And we tend to not communicate with our friends about how we're experiencing the friendship. And that can really lead to resentment, tension over time. And this is why female friendships are actually more fickle compared to men in their friendships. Female friendships are more likely to break up, for that being a major reason. And that can be easily solved if we all just talk to each other about the friendship, even if nothing has gone wrong. I did this recently with one of my friends, and I can't even explain, like, I feel like even emotional just talking about it, how lovely it was, even though nothing was wrong, just to hear about how she experiences our friendship and how she feels loved and what I can do. And it's not like a task, y'all. Sometimes it's just like a few words. Sometimes it's just like asking about something when you get coffee, like, oh yeah, how did this go, etc. But doing that is huge. And if you are in a friend group and you're hanging out in a group a lot, I like to do this. This is very vulnerable, and this also kind of allows you to talk about the friendship itself, which you can bring that up in a group. Like, how are we experiencing this part group? You can. But for everybody to go over like their wins as of late, their woes, like so like highs and lows, their wins and woes, and then the warmth that they want to receive. And that could be just being like, hey, I am, working out. And if y'all could ask me about that next time we're together, that would be great, or keep that in mind. And so I'm trying to work out more. Or that could be like, if y'all could just send like some like good vibes my way, going through a rough time, or if I could just talk right now about this experience that I'm having, right? The warmth that you want to receive is really huge. So I really recommend that. I can't recommend it enough. To that one other thing that I'm just a huge advocate for, and I could hear myself just talking and talking. I'm so excited. So thank you for giving me the space to share all of this. But I do want to also share that one thing that I think makes a huge difference is to put on what I call your connection glasses. Because so many of us are out here avoiding other people because our culture of isolation, because we are in a social avoidant feedback loop, because we are socially anxious, because maybe we are feeling insecure. It's really easy to look around and be like, nobody cares about me. Nobody's reaching out to me. I don't have anybody that wants to be my friend. And I cannot tell you how often when a client says that, I give them this challenge, and that is to write down everybody that reached out to them or invested in them. And when I say invested, sometimes that means making sure when they were in a group setting that they looped back around and made sure that my client finished their story, or that listened intently to them, or like wanted to share something funny that happened with them. So I have them write all the people down that do that. And they always, this is not, and I've been doing this for a while now, y'all. I have over 4,000 hours of doing this. I have not had a client call and be like, yeah, nobody reached out to me or did anything. So if we put on our connection glasses, we can see the ways that people do care about us, that they do love us, that they want to connect with us. And especially, for those of us that have hard childhoods or maybe are going through things, that is so huge for your mental well-being. It can be so easy. And so a little hack that I did that changed my entire life, I swear, rewired my brain, although I don't have photographic images of it. I swear what I did, because I was a huge journaler, was I would write down, okay, what are the 3 ways that I either felt connected today or that somebody invested in me today? And sometimes that was literally just like family members, and sometimes that was like, oh, somebody like shared my post, right? But I'm telling you, it made such a difference in how connected I felt to people. And because I'm so sorry. I know we're getting to the end here too, but it made such a difference in how I felt connected with people. And what happens, y'all, when we feel connected to other people? We want to keep connecting. What happens when you feel connected to your friends? You want to tell them about the funny thing that you heard. You want to make plans. It's energy, right? Connection is energy. So put on your connection glasses, talk to your people about your friendships. It'll make the world of a difference.
Oh my gosh, Jewel, that was beautiful. There were so many great suggestions in there, so many wonderful ideas that we can all just immediately take away and begin trying these things in our everyday life. So thank you so much for that. And yes, we are running short on time, but I absolutely want you to share your podcast with the listeners, because I know they have to check it out to get more of this goodness that you're sharing. So please tell us about it now.
Yeah, thank you. So my podcast is called the Socially Delightful Podcast. And the episode I mentioned earlier where I had my friends on and I explained to them how I made them my friends for the first time, that is the second episode. I highly recommend it. It's so good, I think, for people that have maybe felt anxious or weird, or they're like, nobody wants to be friends. You can't hear that episode and hear their response and not just like feel so good. So I really recommend that episode. We also have a training, or we have 2 trainings that we're so proud of. They were used at the largest women's conference in my state. And my team and I, we were so proud of them that we turned them into trainings that everybody could get. And so if you go to my website, connectionwithjewel.com, you could get those trainings. They are how to belong at any event and how to turn people you meet into friends. So I really encourage everyone to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, because that sounds amazing. I love the podcast. For sure, I'll link the details in the show notes so listeners can find that and your website as well. And those trainings sound tremendous. Like, absolutely, we all need to be doing that. So I love it. Thank you for that. And lastly, Jewel, would you share if you're on social media? I know how you feel about, that, but if you are sharing any of this on any of the socials, where would people be able to find that?
Yeah, at Connection with Jewel on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Just Connection with Jewel, Jewel like a gem, like a rock. And also, Desiree, thank you so much. You moved things around for me because I had some stuff going on. I appreciate that so much. And also, I really appreciate this space. The questions were so insightful, and the questions that you sent me ahead of time were just so beautiful. They made me think about a lot of things as well. And I was like, oh, how can I explain that? And I appreciate you, giving me the space to explain all of this. I know it was a lot, and you were just I think you're one of the best listeners I have ever met. So, thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. I do appreciate that as well. And yes, I love to listen to people because you always learn something. And then there's an old expression, we have two ears and one mouth, so we should listen more than we talk. And so that's part of it. But Joel, you have some wonderful things that you've shared, insightful, absolutely insightful things that you've shared, and suggestions and tips that we really absolutely can take away and begin implementing into our lives. So thank you again for coming on the show and sharing it all with us. It's beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you so, so much for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll talk more soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.